Okay, here's an interesting one about ancient, what we call Celtic lore nowadays, Druids, things like that, but make connections with it and the Christ of the Bible, and actually a time earlier than that. And I'll make a few different discussions and kind of a revealing of the reality of it all, of one of these situations that we all know about quite well. Um, this that we're looking at, it had a timeout right then, is a mold. And this is a perfectly cleaved flat piece of stone and then dug into it, not bas relief where you take everything away but it's actually done the other way, engraved down into it. And each one has a trough built out of it. You can easily see it in this one where it's got it, and then there's a trough that leads off of the stone, and down here is a earring type, but there's a trough that leads off of it, and then there's this pendant that's in question we're talking about that has a trough that leads off of it, right? So there is a corresponding stone that sits right upon this, right on top of it, and it's flat also, but it's been cut out exactly in these places too, and there's holes that are in the top of that stone going all the way through it that have been drilled that lead all the way through, so whenever somebody pours molten metal from a crucible in there, it fills up that pocket and the excess runs out. So you pour it until it runs out. Whenever it runs out, you know that it's filled. It has to be done right so there aren't air pockets and things like that. Right after you do it, usually the table or whatever it's on gets shaken or pounded upon, so it tries to get out air and things like that. Also, they take the area around this and put beeswax type stuff around it and then smush the other one onto there real good. Heat it in a fire, preheat it a little bit, and then take and pour a crucible down there of molten metal, and then so there's a whole process to it, and not just this that you see. And so we can talk about this a little bit. One thing to note up here, of course, this is a cross, and there's a little point up here at the very top of it that conspicuously pokes out, but it sticks up high enough. What that does is it makes a ring you can put uh, a necklace through and carry this thing as a necklace. This has been identified, I believe, as a brooch at. So it'd be a brooch that you take and you hold your cloak on and so on. And so built into the other rock that sits on top of here would be a clasp and hasp that you run your things through. And this here is an earring. They say instead of a real ring, it's too small to be so. This is fairly small. And therefore, it would have been an earring. And this is not the exact one, but there's a few of these have been found. Okay, and I'll show you a cool one here later in the article. But it's been set upon with a drill like you find in Egypt, where it's drilling out a hole, but it only goes to a certain point. They find that this has been set with a drill, and then the circumference of this was set off of that, and this was set off of that, and it's perfect circles if you look at it, right? And there's all this effigy that's around here, and this is somewhat different looking than the one that I was familiar with, but somebody had deciphered it before, and so I don't want to go into what this might say onto it and its symbology that goes along with it, but this is not a biblical correspondence that's here. Let's just say that. If you look here, his face, which looks like just a happy face, and it's not done too well, was also a drill that was put in there in a perfect circle. Then you have a mountain, if you look at it, with a cut-in thing that looks very much like these Kurgan type burials and things, but very much like New Grange. Knock knock. And then above it, it appears to be the sun cutting exactly over it, and a crown top on it. You're all seeing this, right? You can see that the body is drawn and the ribs, and he's kind of emaciated and nailed onto here, and this has got to be Christ, right? Yeah, you got it, right? Not necessarily. Who's this New Grange tomb and the whole thing that goes on with? Well, we're going to look into that. But notice how kind of shoddy this is, and People made fun of the other one. I don't, it's not much better if this one, but this is a fairly good looking stone. The weird thing is where they found this at, but not necessarily. Okay, and so as you look at it, it looks a little bit odd, but whenever they make this, after they make it, they pull it out, and there's going to be little flanges around the edges of it and stuff that have to be trimmed off and all of this. But also, then somebody starts taking metal tools with shapes on the ends of it and uses that as a punch and a hammer and goes around and fixes everything and makes it look right. It's the next little thing. I mean, there could be jewels inlaid and stuff, so they have to put the spurs in there and fix the dent so it fits just the thing and then put the spurs over it. Well, that's not apparently going on here. But who knows what happened to what happened that came out of the mold, as per se, and what was done with it. Let's just get into this story so I can reveal you a few things. Does this ancient mold depict Christ or Odin? You decide. This just came out, but what kind of spurred me to do this is two things. On one of my old videos about something else that's quite related, somebody had asked a question just 2 days ago, and then flipping through the articles that had just came out on this popped up, and I was like, well, here's your answer if you only knew it, but there's more to it than this. Let me just do a video. A team of excavators at an archaeological dig in Chur, Switzerland, have unearthed a 1,000-year-old double-sided mold that was used to forge Christian jewelry. Or was it? The unusual double-sided mold may have been used by pagans for other purposes. Archaeologists from Grobenden Archaeological Services have been digging since March in the area and around the recently shut down Sinhof prison. They say the tiny object dates from sometime between the 9th and 11th centuries AD. According to reports on Swiss Info, the mold measures 9 by 8.5 by 3 and is made of molded clay, but then fired. And it is believed that the double-sided mold was used to forge up to 7 different types of Christian-themed objects, including earrings and a crucifix. So here's another picture of it, and I guess in this one you can clearly see that the ring has a place that it pours out, and this too, the little trench where it pours out here. But so nailed on a cross somewhat, and this idea that comes from it, well, that's the front side of a double-sided mold. Now, this double-sided mold in the early history of Swiss Christianity. While the artifact is far from spectacular, it is the first type ever recorded anywhere in Switzerland, but they mention previously similar objects have been only discovered in Bern and Basel, which is Switzerland, and Winterthur. However, this tiny archaeological treasure is proving to be of great importance in understanding the turbulent times surrounding Christianity's arrival in Switzerland. So, there were people that were definitely at this time, and probably well known by most of the listeners here, that were rejecting it still at this time and going with what their old things were. Well, what was the old things? Well, it was Odin and all of that and the druid type of thing. Well, what's that got to do with it? Well, conspicuously, the whole story goes with Odin having been nailed to a tree and punctured by a spear before, in 3 days and the whole 9 yards. What? Yeah, so whenever they came on with this story and they said, no, it goes like this, there was a problem. But also I want to mention that in a full-scale circle kind of way, it shows you that this was going on everywhere. It seemed to be a culmination situation in a lot of civilizations, and their mythology led to this point. People quite often wonder why the Greeks and Romans and stuff all of a sudden flipped to this. Well, the Romans weren't so godly, if you will, as some of the other people were in truth and reality, but the way that it breaks down, it's a culmination anyhow. And then when you find out, well, they still got behind it and it was all about them anyhow, and the stories actually blend back to all this other stuff, it actually makes sense in a totally different picture that's not normally given to you. Christianity first came to Switzerland with Roman soldiers in the late 4th century, but it was declared the official religion of Roman Empire in 381 AD. After the departure of Romans, Western civilization remained Christian under the Burgundians, like Burgundy, while the Alemanni people in northern Switzerland stayed pagan until the 7th century. St. Gall, 550 to 685 AD, is remembered as the Irish monk who converted people living in and around Zurich and Lake Constant to Christianity. It's kind of like St. Patrick and blah blah blah, or whatever. There's all of this thing, where they had come out and professed Christianity and gotten the local people to mend it in. Swiss molds bearded god. Is that Christ or Odin, though? Well, the crucifixion scene depicted on the double-sided mold recently found in Switzerland is very similar to the style of a cross found at Haverholm in Denmark, and a closer examination of the symbols on Swiss clay molds are similar to the Norse symbols related to their god, Odin. In fact, they're just that's what they are. If they're just using the same molds, what's this? And it seems like that medallion may say something about it too. So many Viking traders were marked with signs of the cross to give them access to Christian trading centers, including those in Switzerland. And so this might lead a credence to why a blending would have been made. But according to Natmus Denmark article, Scandinavian Vikings did not become Christians overnight. Old Vikings regarded Christianity as an addition to their pantheon of gods. Therefore, accepting the new Christian god was relatively easy. In Viking society, at a certain stage, Christ was worshipped alongside gods like Thor and Odin. As Christianity slowly replaced the old beliefs with careful reinterpretations of traditional Norse icons and symbols, many aspects of the gods were incorporated in the new Christian faith. And I could go on for hours and hours about that statement. We're just going to go on, believe it or not. Looking closer at the clay double-sided mold to cover at Graubünden, one might ask, is that Jesus or Odin on the cross? Believe it or not, the stories of Jesus and Odin have surprising similarities. Here's another one, and it's also not the one that I'm originally used to seeing, the first couple of them that were there. But what we see here is a necklace, and it's got ancient Celtic writing on here, runes type of things. And this is what Odin, by the way, was nailed to a tree and ended up figuring out the mystery of it all. And that's kind of the way it comes out in the Christ tale, and then reborn in the whole idea that we all symbolically go through. And we'd only have to do it by dipping in water and baptizing, and that actually comes from something else too. But it's the same, and it takes the same place because it's all the same thing. And if we look, which I'm trying to show people in a lot of my videos, in the Wayback Machine, it all comes from similar roots. Even the linguistics of these people all the way through Sanskrit shows those connections, almost in that Babel type of way. So we see here that necklace is built into, and it almost looks like there's a breakthrough here, so this would get some of the flow in from that and try to make this portion of it work out. But it has a flow out point right there. But this necklace is pretty neat. One can imagine it being made out of gold and then set better and polished and so on, and the brooches that are there. But up here we have something that conspicuously looks like a thunderbird. And whenever its mold is poured, it goes out the top of its head there. But it has a feathery thing and some type of sun symbol almost on its chest. And I tell you, that's not that. That's a raven symbol. But a raven takes the place of the same concept as the ancient birds of buzzards and vultures and so on through these civilizations, a harbinger of death. In fact, it carried on through Edgar Allan Poe and thus quote the raven nevermore and all of these things. So there's still a drastic connection. There's another earring. That cross was made a little better too. It's got a 3D effigy, but you can imagine that somebody could take the regular one and punch that into it and filigree it more. Things like that after the fact. We'll take just a bit of smithing. So both Odin and Christ were crucified. Is this a coincidence? The Norse god of Odin being stabbed and hung from Yggdrasil, the Norse tree of life, is similar to the story of Jesus being crucified on the cross and pierced with a spear. Essentially, both spiritual beings were sacrificed by hanging and were subsequently stabbed. Both figures also spent 3 times 3 days in darkness and or death without any assistance from the other deities, having sacrificed themselves for a higher purpose. My God, why have you forsaken me? 3 days later, he rose again to save all of mankind. Now, I've talked about how that works out zodiacally, and the Earth, in relation to the sun, falls 1 degree per day through the fall of the year, and the 21st of December it symbolically stops, wavers for 3 days, and then starts to rise again. And that's December 25th. So the Son of God, that's how that works out. And oddly enough, that's in everybody's old symbology. But how does it work out with this? Well, it's the same story. And we oddly find that this Norse tree, and it's the tree of life and everything. And so in the Bible, you hear this story about it. It all starts with a tree, doesn't it? And if the people eat it, they will become as of gods of the earth. And you come to find out, yeah, well, it looks like through time, that's pretty much what happened. They named everything, and master of beasts, gods of this earth, blah, blah, blah. Now they seem to do things like the Anunnaki and actually go up into space and can look back upon it. But we hope there isn't some giant flood that their people in the space station look down upon that sounds eerily reminiscent of what's even told in the ancient Sumerian tablets. But that's for other videos entirely. Anyhow, it starts with a tree and it ends with a tree. And you go, well, it's not a tree, it's a cross and everything. Well, that's odd. I guess this would be a good time to do so. Let me show you this. Got a video here that's not going to pull up that I did. See if it'll recall it. Oh, it does right off the bat if you do it. That I did about, I don't know, this is 3 years old, 2 to 3 years old. Anyhow, and it talks about this same subject, and it said, well, it's a different thing because this was out of the Bible. And what it's described, and you can look this up in my site, it says Jesus died on a tree in Egypt, not a cross, and in Sodom. 2018 new info, but I think I made it in it says November 2017, but right before the end of the year, sometimes I'll throw that on there for its new info on it. But in the Bible itself, it tells you in Acts 5:30, and you can look this up, And better yet, I'll do this little thing here for you where I actually do this. I actually go to Bible websites, you know, like BibleHUD.com, and I type in Acts 5:30, and lo and behold, here it is. And they'll tell you in the newer versions of the Bible where it says Jesus from the dead who you killed by hanging on a cross. But all the old versions have him hanging on a tree. In fact, I go through it quite well. But also, over here on the side, you can look at it, and Peter says it also. Galatians have it, and so on. Cursed by everyone who is hung on a tree. Well, he's hung on a tree, he was hung on a tree. And then I finish it off at the end with uh, a version that tells you that he was actually hung on a tree and died in Egypt. Spiritually is called Sodom, and Egypt, where he died on a tree, where our Lord was crucified. And you say, well, there's mistakes in the Bible and stuff. And you go, yeah. But if you look and read it back of it, it actually comes out as that, and that word is tree. And everybody now has taken it and tried to say, so, well, it doesn't mean tree. No, they got the damn word for tree. So I invite you to take a look at this old one here. It's got 632 views, but I swear it had over 2,000 before last Christmas. And I also, last Christmas, whenever it did the whole reset on us all and everything, I lost every comment off of here because there were strings and comments that were on this thing, and they're all just gone. But ironically, some of them are still here from 2 years ago, which is odd. But some of the newer ones aren't here. Frustrating. Anyhow, back to it. Let's go back to this strange medallion that would have been used at the time and the similarities of the story. Well, are there any reasons for us to suspect that the figure on the double-sided mold is not Christ? Well, that's kind of a funny question. Is there any suspect idea, reason that maybe they're one and the same? In a different retelling? I mean, Mormons have this idea where Christ went hibbity hop all over the place, but not talking about that. I'm saying that each one had their own. I mean, this thing Mithra has it come on, Horus and the whole dichotomy of it has it. The same thing plays out in the Greek pantheon and so on. It all has the same thing go on, but then a great importance has been put on the one who, well, is actually a triad in the first place, and then saints and angels and all this other stuff. So there is a pantheon, but people can't see it. And it's all been put on one who is many, and they just go, yeah, that was him too. Oh, no matter what you thought, you were worshiping him just in the wrong way, kinda. This is more the right way, which would have probably been accepted a whole lot more than the way that it came across, huh? A look at the backside of the mold yields a powerful answer to the image of a raven. So, wait. Am I to understand that this is the backside of the same one? And this all lines up? And this necklace? Well, I don't see a pouring point. Does that... Pardon me for doing this, guys. Should have caught this beforehand. Okay, this is here, that's there, that's there. So if we flip it over, it's going to be different, right? So we flip it over and put it on top of this. And so if the rings, well, that can't be right. The ring, oh wait, does it make a ring and a necklace? The medallion's double-sided, and no, that's, misunderstanding maybe. See if I'm wrong in that. Looking at the backside of the mold yields a powerful image and answer of a raven. The 13th century book Poetic Edda discusses an ancient Norse mythology in detail. In this book, there's a description of Huygen and Minin, translated as thought and memory, respectively. These are the ravens. Huygen and Minin were Odin's pair of ravens. They flew all over the world, returning with esoteric information that they then communicated to Odin and gave him knowledge of what was going on in the world. Right? Well, there's other little tellings of this, and so echoes of similar things you can find in the tales of, well, Zeus. He's supposed to have taken, or Jupiter too, taken and gone apparently to the other side of the world and released two birds, for which comes around to the other side of the world, and that ended up being the omphalos, or belly button of the world, and that's where they made the temple of Apollo at Delphi and so on, and that's all their mythology about how he had done that. But people say, well, you must have been on the other side of the world, taking that sacred boat ride every night around the world with the sun and letting them loose. But then hold on, we got these two birds, which are doves in the other story, being released, and then there's a raven, and then like, well, there's a biblical flood idea. Well, if you went on the other side of the world, you'd actually be probably in water here in the middle of the giant Pacific and everything, but that's strange. But why would they have the same story of releasing these animals or having these birds to do it? Well, one of those ravens is supposed to pretty much stay local a little bit in some of the tales, and he's checking out everything's going on in the country, in the area, and surrounding, while the other one goes afar and comes back. So there's something in that variation that you could glean out of it also. And I've seen a few of this girl's videos about ancient Celtic stuff, and she gets pretty deep into stuff, different things, and knows how to pronounce the name somewhat correctly compared to anything that I could pull off trying to read it. And here's a famous picture of Odin, who has lost his one eye, and suddenly it becomes very much like Horus and all this one-eyed God situation that goes on. It correlates to astrotheology and all types of things. And if we look around her neck, this Celtic cross, oh yeah, well, they have these molds that do the same thing, but they get this funny part in them. What's that funny part? It looks like it was made to be put on a spear, but that can't be right. Yeah, it is, if you stab it on the end of a spear, and now that becomes that holy symbol that's always been known for it. But that's that 4 cardinal points, and then the solstices and things, and yeah, it's all just woven into a little necklace. The kids would have learned this as they're making little trinkets. Finding these classic Norse and Christian symbols on the same mold, as in the case with the recently found Grubunden artifact, leads to a host of new questions. How can the Norse Odin story and the Christian Jesus story be so similar? These aesthetic similarities could be, of course, nothing more than coincidence. However, the followers of Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, very famous, and American mythologist Joseph Campbell, this newly discovered artifact in Switzerland is a wonderful example of archetypes and mythology. Well, yeah, they go into that if you've ever read anything of Jung, and he just gets too deep, and I wasn't trying to be a psychiatry major, but I read into that too. And interestingly, what Freud said about Moses and all these things too, and what they had been able to pick out. And you can look at people that have a discerning mind, what they started to put out there in a time whenever it was not real accepted, by the way. In fact, all through time, it's never been accepted to be like this, and tried to be beaten out of people and things through the Dark Ages and Inquisitions and so on. But it still exists to this day, and it's had somewhat of a comeback. in a time that the fog and veil is lifted and the truth of reality and everybody sees after the smoke clears what actually it was, somebody starts Sherlock Holmesing around and going, well, what's this then? And they don't kill him this time, and other people get to find out about it. And these mythological archetypes that we talk about may well account for the so-called comparative coincidences found in the world's religions and folklore. So in all, an interesting find. Well, yeah, if you put it all together and say that, yeah, these mythological archetypes that are found in all these ancient civilizations that these ancient Caucasians had to deal with, then you'll realize that it's a much bigger story. And the 12 tribes idea and this thing that's just kind of a relic a little bit and isn't talked about much, and who that would involve and what happened with those people. And you get an understanding of where it all kind of came from, and then where that came from. And I try to go back as far as we can in symbology and things and try to figure out the reality of it all. It starts to become a mist, something hard to look through. But you can find bits and pieces of things to say that many portions of this go back way, way before writing, way, way before the end of the last ice age. Pardon me. But one of the symbols of the last ice age was that he rose again to save us all from that happening again. Well, what was that? Well, there was a great catastrophe and a flood and everything, and it involves these birds and stuff. And you paying attention? Here's a symbol. The kid's wearing it. Look, she's got a necklace. No, most people don't know, and a lot of it's right in front of them the whole time. Sometimes some people dig up some little thing and they're like, what the hell is this? And I believe some of those molds date for even back a few hundred years before that, and it gets to the point where they go, well, they were doing the same thing before that. So that means that was holding on. Oh, wait, hold on. That's weird. Jesus was nailed to a tree, huh? It says that. And it says he died in Egypt, which is mystically Sodom. Hold on, what the hell? There's a lot more to it than the story alludes to. And we'll show a lot more of that coming up in incoming videos. Tell me what you think down in the comments, and like, share, and subscribe if you aren't already. Make sure your bell's hitting, and we'll get on to the next one. Peace.